Right, okay. So the thing that we've been working on this month is coastal scene. So we've got a couple of weeks, this week and next week, on that still. Last week I did a few kind of drawing demos, so I was just going through a few strategies that might help when you're drawing things like boats. So there were a couple of them, the ones I did. And I think the week before I did a little bit on painting water, so that was my impression of a wave using acrylics. There was a request that I sort of cover trees a little bit this week, so I thought I'd do that. And so, you know, sometimes you get trees in coastal scenes. So this was, I painted this scene quite a few years ago from life. So I haven't got the painting anymore, but that was a photo that from the time. That's at Wales in Norfolk. And quite often you'll get these kind of pine, particularly like pine trees are sort of associated with those. So I thought I'd use that one, and I've also got this photo here, which was like a sandy walkway through, so maybe I'll do a couple of those, use a couple of them. So, using watercolours, I thought I'd do a watercolour demonstration. So what I've done so far is I'm going to go trying to just get some background colours on. Neither worked that well. This one, I added too much water and it started to run back, but I've got better colours on that. This one, this was supposed to be the sky and it's gone a bit too light, so that wasn't great, but I'll use that in a minute. I'll very quickly do that demo using big washes, because I see so many failures with watercolours, and the thing about painting a big area is you need like a big brush, and you need plenty of paint mix. And you know, I've got students that have been painting many years of watercolours, but still aren't quite getting there. So what I do is, you need a palette that's, got plenty of room in to mix the colour. And so what I do is I get plenty of colour mixed up beforehand. Now it's not, this particular sky I would say isn't a bright blue, so I'm going to add a little bit of red to it, and maybe a little bit of the, so I've got ultramarine, which is a purpley blue, cerulean, which is more greeny blue, and a little bit of red, and then lots of water. So I just need to really pile that in. Perhaps do that with a bigger brush than here. With the sort of brushes you're using, a natural hair brush will hold a lot of moisture. It doesn't have to be an expensive brush. Sometimes you can just pick these up for a couple of quid. Even the ones in the cheapo shops are fine for this, but you'll find that you can hold a lot more moisture. So I'm going to paint this, well actually I'll do it the right way out this time. Now this being sort of vertical, it's probably just going to run straight down. But you need to kind of work quite quickly. Let's make that a little bit stronger so you can see it. So sort of working quite quickly to get the paint in. Yeah. So a couple of strokes. If you wanted to make any changes at this point, you could just wash the brush dry and then maybe kind of lift a few little bits out for clouds. So that's using a brush that's sort of kind of moist, but you've dried it slightly. So you could do that. If you wanted some darker areas, just got a sort of green colour mixed here, I'll add a little bit of that in. You could then work in, so if you're adding darker colours, you need to make sure the paint's a little bit thicker. So you don't want like a really watery paint going into it, because it's already moist. If you put like a watery paint on, it will just push all that out of the way. So you want something that can just kind of mingle in with the, what you've got. As soon as it starts to dry, so I can tell that's starting to dry because it's kind of holding the brush marks there, whereas down here it's still a little bit wet, and I can get those nice soft edges. Okay, so that's, if you're interested in watercolour, it's worth just doing loads and loads of practice, just that. So we've got a spot here, and a spot here. Oh, and when you get these little beads at the bottom, you might want to get a dry brush and just dry those off. So this is too steep an angle for watercolour really. Just want a little bit of an angle, but just so you can see what I'm doing. So once I've got that in, I would then try and go in with something this sandy colour. And again, there are a few mistakes you can make. I've seen a lot of people go straight with the yellows, the yellow ochres or the raw siennas. And that's a good place to start, but you might want to add a little bit of red, a little bit of blue. Otherwise you'll end up with a beach that is very, very bright. So this is raw sienna, and I'll add a little bit of sky colour just to dull it down a little bit. And to me that's a better, a more naturalistic sort of colour to start with, something like that. And then again I'll add some slightly darker tones to that. So just mix something a little bit of red and yellow and blue. Basically it's a little bit of all the primary colours, a little bit of red, a little bit of yellow and a little bit of blue. So a tiny bit of blue. So where that's probably a bit too brown, isn't it? These things like the sand and things like that, you know, I can add a little bit in for shadows and that sort of thing. So basically start off like that. I'm not going to worry about the beach huts for this particular demo. It's more kind of the trees, but I just wanted to give you a little bit, you know, background. You will get that. So you let that dry, get that nice and dry, and then once you're there, you could then start on trees. There. So I used one of these that I started earlier. This photo, yeah, I'll use both of them actually. I was thinking this one combines trees in the distance with trees in the foreground. You could do some sketching out if you want first. With things like trees, you could probably do a lot of the drawing with the brush itself, really. So I'll just kind of sketch out roughly where these are going to go in the background. Sometimes that will help just to as a bit of a plan. As you're going back in space, there's like the colour is less strong. So you've got the atmosphere, and it will cut out some of the greens, so you get all the kind of dust and things like that. So you'll find that they tend to go a little bit bluey or a little bit grayer. So the colours, the greens that I've got in the background, I want to just grey down a little bit. So I'll mix a green with another colour. I use a little bit of raw sienna and a little bit of cerulean blue. And it's also a really good idea to have a bit of scrap paper handy, which I started using this morning, just to test out the colours before you put them onto the painting. Because again, with watercolours, once it's down, that's it. There's only so much you can do. So for me, they're a great sketching medium, but I find them a very difficult medium to do any sort of proper painting with. So that's quite green still, so I'm just going to add a tiny bit of red to that, just to grey that down. I think I'd be happier with that, maybe a little bit bluer. Yeah, so yeah, it's been worth just having that to practice with. So I just need a little bit more paint mixed. And I've gone to a slightly smaller brush. Probably go a bit bigger though, something like that would be quite a good size. I'm comfortable with that. And again, it's trying to work fairly quickly. So this, a little bit wetter. Something a little bit like that. Or you can put it on a little bit drier if you want more of a kind of dry brush technique. So it's trying to give an impression of trees. I'm not trying to paint every branch, every twig. It's just to give a sense of there's some trees in the distance. Something like that. They tend to be a little bit dark at the bottoms. Maybe put some of these slightly darker greys and purples in that I had. Go in there. And I think that will do for the trees in the distance. Yeah, and then these in the foreground, going to be wanting some stronger tones. again, I'm going to mix a colour. So I'm going to use some mixer green. So I've got some raw sienna. And what should I go with now? Maybe a little bit of purple. And these particular greens, they're not that intense. You know, it's probably the lights behind them, so they're almost in shadow, really. So a little bit of purple, a little bit of blue, and a bit more green. Sorry, a bit more yellow. So again, just try that out on a little bit of scrap. He wants to go a little bluer. That's more like him. Yeah, I think that'll be right. Yeah, I'm going to go using the brush on its side just to get a kind of dry brush feel to it. So we can use the texture of the paper. And towards the edge, these trees are feeling bluer, so I'm going to add a little bit more blue, a little bit more cerulean blue, which is like kind of quite pale blue. Go with a slightly smaller brush just to get a dry mark. So I'm sort of using a kind of dry brush mark to suggest some of the textures. And this paper's got a little bit of texture, so that can help to give the impression of the trees and branches. Now it's actually worth doing, perhaps I'm going to go to a couple of studies. These are a couple of quick goes I had on Thursday, just practicing just the foliage really more than anything. Painting quite dryly. Go back to the bigger brush, not the bigger area in. Just a little bit. And then the trunk can go here. Make that a tiny bit greyer, browner. Go in there. And then we'll have some shadows at the bottom. So what I'm going to do is just dampen this area a little bit with clean water, because I don't want very strong hard edges there. So just use a little bit of that, and that can just soften out just the shadow area. That's another trunk there. And then smaller branches, I'd use a thinner brush. A few twigs and branches coming across. A little bit like that. So, yeah, with plum trees, I really would suggest little studies of little bits. Don't try and do a whole scene, because it's quite a lot to get those, just get those right. The other thing that I would say is, like, quite often I see students going straight in with a bright green and doing this kind of thing. And to me, you don't see these sort of greens very often this bright in nature. So these are quite useful colours, the really bright greens, but it's kind of useful if you can then tone them down a little bit. So I would then add things like brown to them. So that's with the brown added. And to me, that's a lot more naturalistic sort of colour than just going straight in with an out-of-the-tube green. So yeah, reds, browns, other purples, all sorts of colours you can add into the green to make them a little bit more naturalistic. So purple I find is quite useful. So particularly if you're in a dark area, I can kind of add a little bit of purple into that. And then that sort of varies the amount of colours you've got in there, and not just solid green. So, right, any Any questions? Good to see some energy. Right, okay.
Hello, that's giving you